Arcanum of Steamworks and Magick. Obscura is a classic RPG that blends a unique setting with deep role-playing mechanics. Released in 2001 by Troika Games, it offers a world where magic and technology coexist, creating a rich and immersive experience. Highlights. Setting. The game is set in a fantasy world undergoing an industrial revolution, reminiscent of the Victorian era. This mix of steampunk and traditional fantasy elements is one of its most praised aspects. Gameplay. Players can create their own characters or choose from pre-made ones, with a wide range of skills and abilities to develop. The game offers significant freedom in how you approach challenges, whether through combat, diplomacy, or stealth. Story and characters. The narrative is compelling, with a mysterious story and a diverse cast of companions, each with their own backstory. The voice acting and music further enhance the atmosphere. Criticism. Despite its strengths, Arcanum has been noted for its lack of polish and numerous bugs, which can detract from the overall experience. Overall, Arcanum is celebrated for its ambitious design and unique setting, though it may require some patience to overlook its technical flaws. The old Fallout games were known for their non-linearity. There were almost always multiple ways of solving quests. Character building wasn't restricted by classes, and the world reacted to your choices. Arcanum takes this choice and consequence aspect even further. Players can freely develop both their skills, also affected by apprentice, expert, and master training received during the course of the game, and their stats. The choice between magic or magic, as the game clearly prefers Aleister Crowley's spelling of the word, and technology is an important part of the game too, and characters will not only treat you differently based on your morality and reputation, but also depending on race. Humans, halflings, and half-elves don't face too much discrimination. Dwarves and elves dislike each other. Gnomes manage to get accepted in society after years of hatred, and everyone is prejudiced against half-orcs and half-ogres. Arcanum tries to be a sort of virtual tabletop, a game where different choices result in a different game. It mostly succeeds. You start Arcanum as the sole survivor after the crash of the dirigible IFS Zephyr. At the crash site, a dying gnome gives you a ring and tells you to find the boy. Assassins try to kill you, and then you meet Virgil, a man who claims that you are a living one, a reincarnation of the elven wizard Nasruddin who lived 2,000 years ago. While all of this sounds like a generic Chosen One story, as you uncover the game's mysteries, which might require several playthroughs as some information is available only to characters of a certain alignment, it becomes clear that it's anything but. There are some major twists near the game's ending, culminating in the final encounter with the antagonist, which is less about stopping a world-conquering evil and more about sorting out thought-provoking philosophical differences between the characters. Like in the first Fallout, it's even possible to either join the enemy or convince him to give up without fighting. While the plot and writing are good, the best part of the game's narrative is without a doubt the world building. Arcanum explored steampunk, and not the just put some gears on it kind, and the conflict between magic and technology before they were done to death, but more importantly, it puts a lot of thought into how those things would affect a fantasy world. This is a world where mages have to sit on the back of a train because their power would interfere with the engine. The game takes place at the turning point of history, and the story of the Kingdom of Cumbria shows what happens when parts of society desperately cling to tradition and reject scientific progress. The prosperity of technologically inclined humans leads to a decline of the typical fantasy races like dwarves and elves, and the isolationist mages of Tulla. Political conflicts concerning orc laborers, half-ogre breeding, and the Industrial Council reflect historical issues from the late 19th century. Trade unions, eugenics, democratization of governments. The graphics, while dated even at the time of Arcanum's release, have some really good art direction. This is especially noticeable with books, newspapers, and the map the game uses for fast travel. The soundtrack consists mostly of slow-paced, slightly melancholic string quartet music, with an exception of a more tense track during combat. It's an unusual choice for a soundtrack, but it works very well given the game's setting and atmosphere. While the game never holds your hand the way modern RPGs do with their quest markers and other navigation aids once you familiarize yourself with each area, you'll never have a problem finding your way, as the towns are laid out realistically, often with distinct poor, rich commercial and industrial districts. Buildings are similarly well thought out with shops, train stations, factories, simple houses for the common folk, and huge mansions inhabited by the rich or royalty. Unfortunately, things get dull when you leave the towns and wander into the dungeons, and there are many of those. When the game tells you to explore mines, sewers, forests, or ruins, get ready for slogging through repetitive dark corridors filled with traps and repetitive enemies. Bonus points for creatures made of stone or fire. The former damage your weapons while the latter damage both weapons and armor. There's just nothing interesting about most of the combat-heavy areas. Just the same enemies with occasional size and color variations, same battle music, and same boring corridors. It would help if combat itself was interesting, but it isn't. There's a choice between Diablo-style real-time combat, which sucks if you don't play a melee-oriented character, and turn-based combat with action points, which is only marginally better because the whole system comes down to being fast at doing damage and maybe getting behind enemies for a backstab bonus. Thankfully, the balance is so broken there are many ways of creating absolutely overpowered characters without compromising role-playing aspects, so it's possible to get the fighting over relatively quick. Probably the most annoying aspect of the combat is the AI. Neither the enemies nor the autonomous companions use anything even resembling tactics, but they're pretty good at ruining yours as they'll happily get into combat when you try to be stealthy, burden themselves with junk objects, and walk into traps. Their stupidity can even ruin potentially cool mechanics like item identification, as they'll happily put on unidentified clothes and keep wearing them even if they're poisoned, cause critical failure or just damage them on every turn.